Greetings to all of you, and welcome to session number 45 on the book of Revelation. I'm Pastor Timothy Muse, lead pastor here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Alliance, Ohio. It's a joy to be with you today as we spend another opportunity in this wonderful, fantastic, inspiring book of Revelation. A lot of people see Revelation as being frightening or misunderstood or out there, and apocalyptic writing usually is, but once you're able to break down some of the symbolism and see really what's being talked about, it makes a great deal of sense, and it gives us a great deal of option and opportunity. So I wanted to, we've been spending a lot of time in this book, particularly, as we've been facing this pandemic and the question of, is this God punishing the people? And I hope that as we've spent time in the book of Revelation, as we spent time kind of breaking down the apocalyptic nature of the book, perhaps maybe we have been able to answer the question of whether God is punishing humanity with the coronavirus. I would not necessarily ascribe to that theory, though I know there are those who do. I hope we can see that in studying the book of Revelation, Revelation doesn't point that way. It's very clear in the book of Revelation that when God acts, it is decisive. It is strong. It is assertive. The book of Revelation always has this finality to it. When God acts, there's never a question. And I think that as we continue to live life and see good and see possibility and prosperity, and we see humanity living into its fullest in the midst of struggle and suffering, I think we can see that Revelation, though it will speak to a time, I'm not necessarily sure it's really speaking to this time as the end of all time. And I think every generation has come to the point where if something has happened to say, this is the end of time, this is it. World War II, Vietnam, Korea, famines, plagues. I think you go back all through history and you can see moments where it would look like God has drawn the line in the sand, but in fact has not yet. All right, so we're studying, we're in chapter 21 of Revelation. Chapter 21 is in the far back portion of the book. It's the last, and Revelation is the last book of the Bible, the last book of the New Testament. So you're going to be on the far end of your Bible. Revelation has 22 chapters, so we are almost finished here. We're almost finished. A couple more weeks and we're going to wrap the book up. So I thank you for continuing on in the journey. If this is your first time journeying with us, there's a lot of information prior. You can access that on my YouTube page where you're watching this. On my channel, there's a lot of other things, a lot of other pieces that have led up to this. We have walked from the beginning all the way up to the end. So that's where we are. So we're in chapter 21. I'd encourage you to have a Bible in front of you, certainly. Printed or digital, doesn't really matter what translation or paraphrase you use. I'm working with the New Revised Standard Version, but you can work with whatever version you feel comfortable working with so that you have the words in front of you so you can see what's going on. All right, so we're in chapter 21, like I said, I think a couple of times now, and we're at verse 9. Well, one of the things that, if you haven't figured this out by now, when I'm doing these sessions, like when I lead a Bible study, there are particular things I want to make sure that come out. But in the midst of studying the Bible is not a singular thread. The Bible has so many different connections and opportunities. That's why we can go back and read the Bible over and over and over again and get something different out of it every time. So the Bible is having so many different threads, so many different connections, so many different pieces of understanding. It's going to lead us in different directions. And I really don't know ultimately where we're going to get to in the end. I really don't know, and I really don't want to plot that out. I don't necessarily see this as a lecture, but let's see where the Spirit leads us. There are some things I want to make sure that come out of this, but if I were to go back and do this again next week on the same text, on the same chapter, other things might come out. That's the beauty of studying the Bible, and that's why we can go back into the Bible again and again and again. Anyway, so we are in chapter 21, verse 9. John just saw the new heaven and the new earth. First heaven and first earth had passed away. The proclamation, the promise that God is going to reside with the people. No longer is there going to be separation. God is going to be in the midst of the people, and the people are going to be in the presence of God. So verse 9, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And in the Spirit he carried me away to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It has the glory of God and the radiance like a very rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. It has a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the 12 gates, 12 angels. And on the gates are inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of a city has 12 foundations, and all of them are the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. All right, so we have this interconnection here. And this is the powerful thing. I really think there's something that needs to be realized, again, about angelic understanding. So John says, in one of the 7 angels, who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues. So this angel, this messenger from God, was bringing down to earth one of the bowls of the 7 last plagues. So this messenger was carrying something awful and terrible and destructive. But yet, at the same time, this messenger is now taking John up to show him the bride. So again, when we've talked about angels in the past, angels are not created to be beings that make their own decisions per se. They are created as messengers. They are the go-betweens between God and human. And their roles can be multifaceted. They can carry the bowls of the 7 last plagues, and they can come and they can give these powerful positive messages. They can be the ones that will strike down the devil and work against the forces of evil, and they can be the same one that comes and pronounces the birth of the Messiah. So we don't necessarily have different angels for different purposes. An angel is a messenger. The messenger does what the one who's sending the message tells them to do, whether it is good or bad, whether it is positive or negative, whether it is destructive or whether it builds up. So God employs the angels in many and various ways. God employs the angels to bring good news, to bring judgment. God employs the angels in many and various ways. And it's important for us to grasp this, because it's not the angel who decides this, it is God. The angel just does the bidding of the Lord. The angel is not an independent thinker. Now, when we transpose that down to our being, we are independent thinkers as humans. We make initiative. But at the end of the day, when we claim kinship with God, when we claim connection to God, then our role is not to make up our own message, but to bring the message of the divine, to speak the words. Whether those words are difficult to speak or not, to speak the words. There have been many times, not only as a preacher, but also as a Christian, where God has put on me to say something. One of the processes of writing a sermon, once the text is read, is then to pray about it, think about it, put it out there to the community in my thoughts and in my actions, and really kind of ruminate around it all week until something starts to percolate, something starts to bubble. And sometimes God puts on me, or the Spirit speaks to me in a way that says, I need you to say this, and I'll be like, I don't want to say that. Well, the Spirit's like, I'm not concerned about what you want to say. This is what I want you to say. An angel, we act in a lot of ways, we are to act in a lot of ways like angels. God tells us, God speaks to us, and God commands us to do something, and we as God's people are supposed to do it. And when we don't, well, that's when things become difficult for us. Not necessarily difficult in financial difficulty. God doesn't necessarily punish us in that way. But when the Spirit kind of draws away from us a little bit because we're not following, it does become more difficult to get through our daily existence. So like an angel who can have a multifaceted expression, so can we. We can be called to speak joy, and we can be called to speak challenge. We can be called to encourage, and we can be called to chide. And we can be called to encouraged and to be chided. That's all part of this journey. That's all part of this walk. So he says, come and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. So this imagery, now this great marriage between Christ, who is the Lamb, who would be the groom, and the bride, who would be the one forever connected to the groom. So there's an intimacy here. The vision is supposed to be that of intimacy. It's supposed to be that of connection and belonging and presence and householdness. You know, in the ancient world, I mean, actually in most of human history, prior to probably the last, I don't know, maybe even 50 years, but maybe a little bit longer, I haven't really studied it. It used to be that a woman lived with her parents, a man lived with his parents, or maybe was off in the military or what have you, and they didn't live together until they got married. Now, hear me say this. I'm not making any judgment one way or another, but in the text, the vision coming out of the text is now the bride who would have been, the word is necessarily estranged, but would have been separated. There wouldn't have been a union yet. There's not a union until marriage. So the vision is a marriage between God and humans, between God and people. And that union creates an intimacy. It creates a belonging and a connection that hasn't been there before. Yes, we have an intimacy with God. God knows us. We belong to God. We are heirs of the kingdom. That's the promise of baptism. But that intimacy is skewed not only because of our sin, but because of separation. Well, that sin and separation are gone. Now the intimacy is very connected. It is very close. It is pure, and it is as it was meant to be. Come and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And in the Spirit, So, you know, there's another statement here, in the Spirit. What does this mean? In the Spirit, you know, that's kind of the question that really kind of permeates through all of what's happening in Revelation. Is John, you know, as John is up in heaven, is John like physically up in heaven, or is he in a trance and his spirit, his soul, his being is lifted up into heaven? Is this some kind of what we would call an out-of-body experience? It's not really clear, and it's not really sure, and it doesn't necessarily matter. But I think what we can draw from this, you know, when we talk about in the Spirit, now I'm going to digress here for just a moment. Prior to the Reformation, really, quite frankly, but in a lot of Christian thinking and a lot of spiritualist thinking, the spirit is pure and the body is corrupt. And the goal of the spirit is to rid itself of the body. This was something that was seen very early on in the church with the ascetics and the early church fathers and early church writings. So this idea of being in the Spirit, this purity, it's supposed to be a vision of purity. That John is in his most purest form. That's where he's at. So what he's seeing is he's seeing this impurity, which would mean that John, though is living, is capable of being in the presence of God because he is free of sin. Now, how he is free of sin, we're not really sure. Again, there's a lot here that we could ruminate on and we could get hung up on, but in order to do that, we miss what's happening. So we don't want to get hung up on those pieces. We don't want to ruminate on those pieces. So in the Spirit, he carried me away to a great high mountain. And he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So being high up on a mountain, you know, that vision of being high up on a mountain, being in the presence of God, when we look at most of the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see communion with God happening high up on a mountain. Again, remember, we've talked before, heaven above, hell below, earth in the middle. So if an earthling, if an earth person, a human, is going to commune with God, they want to be as close to God as possible. So going high up on a mountain would bring them closer to God than if they were down in a valley. And the idea, the thought was, you know, God is going to hear the prayers of the people if they're higher up, if they're closer to God, okay? Now, we in our modern sense of spirituality, we kind of understand that to be a little bit differently. We understand God is not residing up in the clouds, if you will. We don't really know where God is residing, but we've been through the clouds. We fly above the clouds. We've been to space. I mean, we've got a rover on Mars right now. I think we sent a probe out past Pluto. Okay, so we've been out there. We've seen what's out there. We got the Hubble telescope looking out there. We've seen what's out there, and we haven't bumped into yet. We haven't bumped into yet a great throne room with a great throne. That's not to say this isn't true. That's not to say this isn't accurate. It's just to say that the three-tiered reality of heaven above, hell below, and earth and humans in the middle isn't really accurate, because we've been down too. We know what's at the center of the earth. We know what's at the core. So anyway, all right. But anyways, up on a high mountain again. Remember, we're looking at this from a 21st century perspective. We're going back 2,000 years. We have 2,000 years of knowledge and advancement and understanding of all portions of life. So we understand what's going on in ways that the writer didn't. All right, so he's high up on a mountain, and he sees the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. This is the bride. This is the epicenter. Jerusalem is the epicenter of God in the world. It is the holy city, Zion. It always has been, and it will return to be. Does this mean that everybody needs to live in and flock to Jerusalem? This is a vision of a new Jerusalem, a new holy city, a new place of God's residing, a new place where God and people will be one. And the vision of it is glorious. It has the glory of God and a radiance like a rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. So it has this vision of God residing in the midst of it. The bride and the groom residing together. And if Christ is the bride, if the Lamb is the bride, or the groom, I'm sorry, if the Lamb is the groom, if God is the groom, and Jerusalem is the bride, then they will reside together. And that's that radiance. That radiance is the pure presence of God in the midst of the city. That radiance is the pure presence of God residing in the midst of the city. It has a great high wall with 12 gates. So a great high wall. So this is a fortified city. This is a city that no one will get in without invitation. And if we think to ourselves, how, But is that not heaven? Nobody can break into heaven. Nobody can crash through the door, sneak in through the sewer system. That's a very human understanding. Us as humans, we like to think that which we are not supposed to get into, we need to break into. But from a God perspective, entrance into heaven is free. You're allowed to come in as you will. The key, the price is believing in God. So the New Jerusalem, the bride, is a fortified city. High walls. There is no way in except through one of the 12 gates. And those 12 gates are guarded by 12 angels. So the only way into the New Jerusalem is by God. The only way to get into the New Jerusalem is by God. Now this is meant to be a proclamation, a warning, a path for those who are in the world now to know and realize that that nobody will sneak their way into heaven. Jesus talks about this. Jesus talks about being the sheepfold, the sheep gate. The thief tries to break in, but the shepherd comes in through the sheep gate. Okay, he gives this imagery. Well, heaven is very much like that. People may try to break in. I want to go to heaven, but I don't want to do what God asked me to do. Well, you ain't going to heaven if you ain't doing what God's asking you to do. Because that's the deal. That's the goal. And this is the vision. Okay, so if we think of the modern day vision of heaven, we think of St. Peter standing there at the Pearly Gates. That's where this vision comes from. It's a little, it's a little embellished. But that's where this vision comes from, this idea of the gates of heaven. 12 gates. 3 on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west. So this is a four-cornered city, square. The walls are square, okay? Four corners of the city, which is the way it's supposed to be. A fortified city, walls built square. Remember Jericho, big city, and its walls came down by God's grace, by God's power. But this city, and it has every area, every wall has gates, okay? So the vision is that you need to get in by God's invitation, but there are many portals. Many portals. There's a portal in each direction. So regardless of what direction the people come, the people from the east and the west and the north and the south, all have access to the New Jerusalem. This is not just for the Israelites. This is not just for those who followed Christ. This is anybody can have access to the New Jerusalem. And it's also important, I want to bring up just briefly, we go back to numerology. Way back in the beginning of this series, we talked about numerology, numbers. And the prime number, the holy number, is 7. 7 is the number of completion. That is the triune God in the four corners of the earth. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, north, south, east, and west are the four corners of the earth. Well, here, the New Jerusalem, this perfect city with the radiance of God in the midst of it, has gates on all four sides. On all four sides. So there is no part of the earth that is excluded from access into the New Jerusalem. I think that's a really important vision. In the Old Jerusalem, the city walls had one gate. And then there was a people door, which was called the Eye of the Needle. And after sundown, the gates were closed. And then if you wanted to go in or out of the city after sundown, you had to go in through the Eye of the Needle, through the people door. That's that vision that Jesus talks about, the camel going through the eye of the needle. To get a camel through a people door, they have to shuffle through on their knees. But in the New Jerusalem, there's no doors. The angels are the guards. And there's no people door. And there's gates on all sides. So access is there. This also says, now remember, the 12 tribes of Israel, so this city connects back to the Old Testament. So what God did in the Old Testament with the 12 tribes of Israel still stands true. It is still important. It still matters. The 12 tribes of Israel still matter. There was the movements after Christ's ascension in the early church to do away with the Old Testament, to do away with the old work of God. But we don't do that. Here in the Lutheran Church, we acknowledge both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament has something very powerful and important to say to us about God's work in the world. So the 12 tribes of Israel on the gates indicate the importance of what God did in the Old Testament. This is not just a New Testament expression. This is an Old Testament expression too. And so not only are there the 12 gates, and the wall of the city has 12 foundations. And on them are the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So the walls are held up. Foundations are the 12 apostles. So that's really important as well, because now the city is not only built on the Old Testament, it is also built on the New Testament. It is all complete. It is all encompassing. So the story of the Israelites and the story of the Christians both belong in the New Jerusalem. They both belong together in the New Jerusalem. This is not just one story over another. Again, this is all encompassing. Heaven is for everyone. God is for everyone. Okay, so 15. Then the angel who talked to me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and its walls. The city lies 4 square, its length the same as its width, And he measured the city with his rod 1,500 miles. Its length and width and height are equal. He also measured the walls, 144 cubits by human measurement, which the angel was using. The wall is built of jasper, while the city is pure gold, clear as glass. The foundation of the wall and the city are adorned with every jewel. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh crystallite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates are 12 pearls. There's the pearly gates. Each of the gates is a single pearl, and the city and the streets of the city is pure gold, transparent as glass. So the city is big. 1,500 miles. All right. Square. The city lies 4 square. Its length the same as its width. He measured the city with his rod, 1,500 miles. 1,500 miles. It's a cube. It's perfection. 1,500 miles. It's massive. It's a massive cube of perfection. Okay? Square, high, round. All right? Yeah, round. Square, high. Okay? The walls are jasper. And the walls are the measure 144 cubits by human standards. And let's see if I have that's almost 75 yards, so that's almost 150 feet. Okay, so they're pretty high walls. Pretty high walls. You can imagine. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 3 feet, 75. No, 150, 225 feet. My apologies. The math wasn't working in my head real quick. So you can imagine, very high walls, square, massive. This city is massive. And the vision of it, again, what we want to see is it is beyond compare. Its beauty, its massiveness, its presentation, this is all more than we can imagine. And why does it need to be more than we can imagine? Because if we can imagine it, we can own it. This is God's city. This is God's crafting. And it's more than we can imagine. It's bigger than we can imagine. It's more glorious than we can imagine. All of the gems and the jewels. Its wall is pure jasper. The city is pure gold, clear as glass, which I think is kind of, I don't know. There's a part of me that finds that might be a little bit of cruelty. Whereas, if the vision is true, and all of the angels and all of the demons are thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, if one of them should happen to get out, which probably wouldn't be possible if they do, and they found themselves outside the walls of the city looking in, seeing the glory, I don't know if God would be that cruel, but the clarity. And the other way you could look at it, is that they're clear because God doesn't have to worry about anybody trying to look in. Anybody who's coming in the city is welcome to come in. That's kind of the great thing about the Bible. You can look at it, you can understand it in different ways. So, the wall's pure jasper, the city is pure gold, clear as glass. Gold is, and really in a lot of ways still is, the purest and most valuable metal. Substance. To have gold is to have power, to have control. Actually, the United States, our currency is based on gold. And we, as the United States, have, I think, the biggest reserve of gold in all of human history. And so gold is what we base our currency on. So gold is still a very precious metal. And so the city is gold. And in the ancient world, the peasants would never touch gold because they wouldn't want to defile it. They wouldn't have the access to it. So here they are in the city of gold. Foundations of the walls are adjoined with every jewel. One jewel for each apostle, one jewel for each gate. There are 12 different jewels that are listed. The 12 gates are 12 pearls. Each of the gates is a single pearl. And the city is pure gold, transparent as glass. The streets of the city. So there's the pearly gates. That's where we get it. The pearly gates. And when we think of the pearly gates, we think of two gates, one entrance. You know, they open up like double doors, like double gates. And here's St. Peter standing there letting you in the pearly gates. Welcome to the pearly gates. And this is really why it's important. And I'll only stress this a little bit because I know I've stressed it before. This is why it's important that we read the text. Because for one thing, Peter's not at the pearly gates. 12 angels are. And they're not just one set of gates, they're 12 sets of gates. So rather than having one gate with Peter standing outside with a podium, what's your name now? No. There are 12 gates of pearls. Each gate is a pearl. So when we talk truly about the pearly gates, there are 12 of them. 3 on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west. And they're single gates, guarded by angels. So you see what happens when the text is again, and that's what happens when you don't read it. If you don't read it, then it becomes myth. And we don't want the Bible to become myth. We don't want the Bible to become meme. We want the Bible to speak truth for what it is. So the New Jerusalem, this massive cube, this massive square by square, the perfection, 1,500 miles, 225-foot walls, clear, foundations with all these jewels, and these 12 gates. It's 12 gates. So, and I'm trying to think if I can give you an idea of what 1,500 miles looks like. I think it's about 550 miles from here to Chicago. So, think about that. It's massive. The point is this, it's massive. It's meant to be massive. It's meant to be more than we can grasp. All right, verse 22, and I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need for sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. The gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. People will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who practices abominations or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. All right, so again, and there's really not a whole lot of definition or a whole lot of detail, but there's enough. So there's no temple in the city, and there's no need for a temple. A temple, holy ground, is the place to find the divine in the midst of a secular world. Churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, these are all set up to be places of separation, holy, that's what it means to be set apart, where God resides or God can be accessed more fully in the midst of a secular world. But in the New Jerusalem, there's no need for that because God is immediately accessible. God is immediately accessible. God's presence is right there all the time. God is immediately accessible. There is no need for a place for God to reside because the city is where God resides. Because God doesn't need to be separated from the people. God and the people can be one. They can be together. The city has no sun or moon to shine on it. Remember, when God created the heavens and the earth, God created the greater light, the sun, to rule the day, and the lesser light, the moon, to rule the night. But there's no night and day. There is no time of darkness. There is no time of shadow. There is no need for sleep or rest. All of that's been eliminated. No, now God is the light. And that light shines continually. The lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. So this will be a place where glory and power is brought in. True worship. You know, when we, and this has always been a challenge for humans throughout history. When we come into God's presence, when we come into church, when we come into worship, we're all equal before God in church. Whether you're a painter or a president, whether you're a trash collector or a CEO. Position and power doesn't mean anything before the cross. Now we forget that sometimes because position and power usually indicate money. And money is what the driving engine is for just about anything in our world. So we forget that there is equality before God. But what the vision we get here is kings and nations will walk by, they'll bring their glory into it, because it doesn't matter who you are, in God's presence you're less than. God is God. There is no one who's bigger than God. There is no one who can even come close to God. So God is God. So it doesn't matter presence-wise. It doesn't matter. God is God. All right, so its gates will never be shut by day, and there's no more night there. So the city's open all the time. And the gates never being shut means there's no sandstorms, there's no bad weather, and there are no armies trying to invade the New Jerusalem. The only reason why you would close the gates is if there was an invading army or if there were weather like a sandstorm. Now, we don't have sandstorms here, but you know, if a sandstorm was coming across, you close the gates so that the sand would blow up over the walls. Not necessary. The gates will never be closed by day, and there's no night, so there's no reason to close the gates at night. Because there's no night. You close the gates at night because you never knew who was going to sneak in. So this vision is a vision of constant glory, constant praise, constant peace, constant settledness, no fear of marauders, no fear of invasion, no fear of destruction, constant love and grace and wonder. And that's what we want. That's peace. Now I want you to think about something. And I know some of you will probably say, I remember this time. Why don't you think about, never having to worry about turning your lights on because it's always light. But I mean, again, you'd be like, oh my God, I never sleep. Well, we don't need sleep. And you never have to lock your doors because no one's coming in. There's no negative, no evil. That's the vision we're getting here. And though it may seem so simple, none of us can truly grasp that because none of us can truly think in terms of no evil, of no sin. We're not capable of doing that. People will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who practices abominations or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So that last statement there, that's kind of like okay, this is what I'm looking at. Oh, by the way, if you want to get here, this is what you need to do. It's a reminder. Let us not get caught up in how beautiful what is to come to forget that we have a job in order to do now. Let us not think that we can get into this without doing this, because you can't. It's not possible. It's not how it works. All right. So that's the New Jerusalem. A lot of detail, but we can see that it connects back to the Old Testament. We can see that it connects to the New Testament. It is the whole story of God's people. Everybody's welcome. Those who were written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And when we go back to the Book of Life, the Book of Life didn't have anything to do with ancestry or gender or profession. It had to do whether you did or didn't accept God, to accept Jesus, to walk the path of faith. So heaven is probably the biggest melting pot of diversity there is. And entrance into heaven comes through the Book of Life. not through actions or birthright or gender or nationality. And that's really important for us to grasp always, even in our world today. In our world today, we certainly are divided. I don't know if we're divided more than we ever were before. I think we just know about our divisions deeper than we have in a long time. But that division doesn't extend to salvation. Christ's crucifixion and resurrection is for everyone. It doesn't matter skin color or it doesn't matter gender or nationality. It matters faith. That's the determinant for salvation. All right, we're going to stop here today. I look forward to seeing you next week. After this session's over, my contact information will come up. If you have any questions or anything of that nature, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll do the best I can to answer them either directly or in the next session, but reach out to me. I'll do what I can for you, so make sure that we're all clear. So we'll see you next time. We're going to be in the last chapter of Revelation, chapter 22. I don't know if we'll wrap it up next week. We may wrap it up next week. If not, we will wrap it up the week after. So there we have it. Have a great day. Have a great week. Whatever God brings for you, may it be joyous and powerful. And we'll see you next time.